Welcome back into the Pick and Roll NBA podcast with Jet and Sap, presented by Full Press Coverage. I hope everybody is enjoying their weekend. Today, we have a little bit of a special show for you. Not special in that there's anything groundbreaking, but special in that we have three bombastic guys saying bombastic things. We're going to take a look at Sir Charles Barkley, Draymond Green, and a name we haven't heard from in a while, but it's, he's one of the NBA greats. Phil Jackson had some interesting things to say about his time with the New York Knicks. So let's get right in with Charles Barkley. Charles Barkley is on TV a lot right now because he's been covering the tournament, which is always a blast because he has no idea who's playing or who any of the players are. He is also still covering the NBA, and he does make the rounds on podcasts and news channels. You see him pop up on Fox or CNN. He's all over the place. You can't turn the TV without seeing Charles Barkley. Barkley is never known to shy away from an opinion, Sap, and sometimes his opinions ruffle people the wrong way. This one, I'm sure, is to get to you specifically. Here's what Charles Barkley had to say in regards to the current state of the NBA and the best player in the league. Right now, no disrespect to LeBron or Giannis or anybody, but James Harden might be the best basketball player in the world, period. Kobe and Jordan were better players from a guard standpoint, but as far as offensively, they couldn't shoot threes like him. Every time he goes to the basket, he's going to hit somebody and get 2 free throws. So Charles Barkley says James Harden's the best player on the planet right now and the best offensive guard ever. Thoughts?
Well, I love Charles Barkley. He's one of my favorite guys. I mean, I think the TNT show with Barkley, Shaq, Kenny Smith, and Ernie Johnson is the best in all of sports, whether it's football, basketball, baseball, pick any sport. That's a great show. It feels like a radio show because the four of them just kind of, seem like four friends having conversation. The first part, as far as James Harden being the best player in the world right now, I think he's a leading candidate for MVP. I'm not going to disagree with that. But I think we're forgetting that there's another half of the court that you have to play. And James Harden occasionally has had some years where his defensive numbers weren't atrocious, but oftentimes he looks not engaged defensively. So I've always felt that to be the best player in the sport, you have to also be a pretty good or an elite defender. And LeBron James still remains the best player in basketball. Now, in a given month, is he better than James Harden? Maybe not. I think the last month before LeBron got hurt, his play was going down a little bit, which is generally the case with LeBron. There's usually about a 3 or 4 week stretch in the year where he kind of amps it on down and then, amps it back up for the postseason. Harden's not a really good defensive player. We get that. Offensively, he's magnificent, but I don't think he's the best player in the league. Now, I'm going to elevate him higher than, say, when the season started, especially early in the season when he was in Houston and he mailed it in for 8 to 10 games with the Rockets. That's why I push back a little bit about him being the leader for MVP, because it's the 2020-2021 season,
Right, should be
not just
penalized
the 21 season. He should be penalized. It's the MVP of the entire season, not just 82% of your games.
He actively tanked the team.
Right, that's never a good thing. That's not leadership, right? So you have to question that. So he got his way out. Now he's with Brooklyn. They look like the best team in basketball. He's clearly a top 3 MVP candidate because Durant's been out for a month and a half. Kyrie, comes and goes as he pleases. And Durant and Harden's been the one constant there. So absolutely, I think he's an MVP candidate. But on the defensive side of the ball, he's, to me, a liability, whereas LeBron leads the NBA in defensive win shares right now. And we know what LeBron can do defensively when engaged. And he was engaged in the bubble last year, led to a championship. And when he was in Cleveland, he was engaged when necessary. Same thing in Miami. James Harden doesn't have that type of ability. I also think that if you're going to declare someone as the best player in the league, that player has to show an ability to elevate his game in the postseason, something James Harden's never done. There's a few theories behind that. Because he's been so ball dominant, that I think by the postseason, he is quite frankly exhausted. He also doesn't strike me as a guy that works that hard to stay in shape like LeBron James does. Also, he lives at the free throw line. That's great in the regular season, Jet. That doesn't work in the postseason. Karl Malone had the same issue. Karl Malone would go to the free throw line 10, 12 times a game in the regular season. When you get to the postseason, the referees swallow that whistle. You're not going to the line that often, and his play sunk in the postseason. Same thing with James Harden. So to declare him as the best player in basketball, I can't go there because he's a liability defensively, and I want to see him elevate his game in the postseason. He's had a marvelous 2.5, 3 months with Brooklyn. Great. He may win an MVP, leading the league in assists, averaging 25 a game, carrying that team. But to declare him as the best player in basketball, no. I've always felt that really for the last 7, 8 years, the only discussion was LeBron and Kevin Durant. And I always would push back against Durant because Durant can be a good defensive player, not as good as LeBron defensively, but also Durant's nowhere near as durable as LeBron James. I mean, Kevin Durant's played 19 games in the last 2 years, so I can't put him into the equation. So I'm going to have to disagree with Sir Charles about James Harden being the best player in the game right now.
Yeah, I think you made a great point about the postseason stuff too. I mean, if he's saying like right now, then yeah, it's a regular season thing, and you could certainly make the argument James Harden's been one of the great regular season players, not just recently, but of all time, because he's, I mean, triple doubles, scoring outrageous numbers. So yeah, regular season, tremendous. But yeah, he has wilted a little bit in the postseason, and for reasons that you just mentioned, Sap, I think conditioning, the free throw shooting, which, I mean, like Barkley said in his own statement, like he gets to the line whenever he wants. It's a nightmare to watch. It's not a pretty brand of basketball at all, but it is very effective for him. But the biggest thing is as you alluded to, Seth, the defense. I can't elevate somebody to the best player in basketball when he doesn't play both ends. And I actually think he's improved a little bit defensively, but he's not a one-on-one defender. He's at best a team scheme defensive player. To me, the three best players in the league have distanced themselves to the point where I think it's pretty clear. My three best players are LeBron when healthy, obviously Durant when healthy, and Giannis in my mind, because all three of them play defense. If Kawhi Leonard would, grace us with a full season of playing, I put him in that conversation too, because he's elite both ways. James Harden, I can't deny, is the best scorer in the league. He is the most outstanding scorer in the NBA right now. This year, Bradley Beal's leading the league in scoring. It's still James Harden because of how often he can get to the line. And
more than shooting. Durant, though, I still think Durant is the best scorer in the league because he'll get 30
Durant's
on 12 shots.
The most varied scorer, but I think that Harden's just like he puts the amount of points he puts up. I mean, because he goes to the line so much, so he's putting up bulk points. So yeah, Durant can score in more ways than Harden. I'm not arguing that. I'm just saying Harden puts up more points because of the way he plays, which again is maddening to watch. I hate it. It's a very ugly brand of basketball, but it's made him a lot of money and it's won him a lot of games in the regular season. But I'm not putting him when LeBron and Durant are out right now, both with injuries. I think Giannis is the best player in the game, and then I would say I might consider James Harden, but if I'd also say Kawhi Leonard because to me he's the best on ball defender in the league, and so I could see him dominate a game both ways. He also, I know you don't like to hear this, but has elevated his game in the playoffs.
Yes, he has. No, without question. I'll give him that. I can't give that to James Harden. Giannis, I can't give that to either. His play goes down in the postseason, quite frankly, because he doesn't have a varied enough offensive game. And when you're ready to play a team in a 7-game series, you can really game plan against that player. If you're dipping in and out,
but
in
at least he'll play defense. If he's not scoring, he'll still be giving you defense. If Harden's not scoring, he's giving you nothing in the postseason.
And Giannis is in phenomenal shape, and he busts his ass. I mean, Giannis was one of the few guys in the All-Star game that looked like he was playing at a very high level. That's why I thought that his team was going to win the game because he was just playing hard. He just plays hard every moment that he's out there. So yeah, I can buy into that. Harden's marvelous, and I agree with you. Sometimes it's really frustrating to watch, maybe because he's left-handed. Normally, I always think of lefties being smooth. Like I remember Steve Young as a quarterback was always smooth. Pitchers that are left-handed are smooth. But let me make a comparison to baseball. One of the reasons that we put Mookie Betts so high as, at worst, the second best player in baseball behind Mike Trout is because of his defense, right? I mean, Mookie can hit for average, hit for power, steal bases, but he's an elite defender, so we elevate him up there. Trout's also an elite defender. James Harden, to me, is a guy who, is Miguel Cabrera, right? He can win a triple crown, but he does nothing defensively or on the base paths. And that's what I kind of get with James Harden. He's not going to help you defensively. So at no point can I say this is the best player in the league. Now, he could be the most valuable player, although I think it still has to be held against him what he did in Houston. Got to hold that against him.
It should. He did the opposite of being valuable.
Exactly. He ate his way out of Houston, and that's not what a leader does at all.
So as far as the other comment, him being the best offensive guard of all time, Charles's point was that they couldn't shoot threes like him. I think that's a little unfair because, especially with Jordan and really with Kobe until like the last couple of years of Kobe's career, threes weren't that popular. That wasn't the game plan. They weren't asked to do that. Harden will take 10 a game, no problem. Will take 10 threes in a game. Jordan, the first couple of years in his career, probably didn't take 10 in a season.
He was not a three-point shooter. Late in his career, he adapted enough, but the game still wasn't a three-fest like it is now. Kobe obviously played later than Jordan, and Kobe became pretty accomplished at three later in his career, especially when he won his MVP in 2008. I can't hold that against Jordan and Kobe because it wasn't really part of the game back then. Larry Bird didn't take a lot of three-pointers, and Larry Bird's one of the greatest shooters the sport's ever seen. It just wasn't something that you did. To go back to old box scores, even the Lakers-Celtics in the 85 or the 87 finals, you don't see a lot of threes. I remember watching the games. Occasionally, Byron Scott would chuck up a three or Michael Cooper would chuck up a three. The Celtics, Bird occasionally would, Danny Ainge would. You just didn't see players shooting threes. So to hold that against Jordan and Kobe, I think, is unfair. Ask defenders, who would you rather guard, Kobe or Jordan or James Harden? And I would think that defenders would say, I'd rather defend James Harden. There's probably a way to contain him or stop him. There was no way to stop or contain Michael Jordan or Kobe Bryant. They just were too good. Their footwork was impeccable. Their athleticism was through the roof. Harden's not a great athlete. He kind of does it in a herky-jerky fashion. He goes to the line a lot. And look, when Harden elevates his performance in the postseason the way Jordan and Kobe did, maybe we can have that discussion. He's got a wide range of skills. There's no question about it. But I can't hold the fact that he's a better, quote-unquote, better three-point shooter than Jordan and Kobe against those players because it really wasn't a big part of the game back in the 80s, 90s, and even in the early 2000s. The three-point shot became more prevalent 8-9 years ago.
I pulled it up on Basketball Reference, Sep. For Kobe Bryant, the most threes he ever took in a season was 518. That was in 2005, 2006, where he shot 35% on them. Right. The most threes Michael Jordan ever took in a season was 96, 97. He took 297 threes. He shot 38% on them.
That's fine.
The most threes James Harden has taken in a season, Sap, 1,028 in 2018. That's the most he's taken. This season, he's already taken 232. He's had seasons where he's taken 843, 756, 722. I mean, just blowing those three-point totals out of the water in terms of how many attempts he's had at it. And James Harden, also, the percentages aren't as good as those guys from the three-point line. So he's just hitting more because he's taking more. It's not that he's better at it. He's taking way more.
The year that the year he took over 1,000, which is 12 a game, which is the only guy in the league who should be taking 12 threes a game is Steph Curry. He's the greatest shooter ever. What was his shooting percentage that particular year when he took over 1,000 3-pointers?
37.
Okay, and Jordan's year that he took nearly 300, which is a pittance compared to what Harden took, he was at 38%. So if Jordan chucked up more threes, he would have hit more. Obviously, that goes without saying. It was a different game 25 years ago. So I can't hold that against Jordan and Kobe. Come on. I mean, look, Harden's a marvelous player. Those guys, and I'm not going to start using assassin and all that stuff. That gets overused somewhat. But those guys were unstoppable. They were unstoppable. Athleticism, desire. They're both sociopaths, right? I mean, may Kobe rest in peace and Michael Jordan still with us, thankfully. Those guys were insane. Harden seems like a really gifted guy who's playing in an era where he can get to the line a lot and chuck up threes. Great. He's awesome. But I'm not going to put him in the same class of those guys. It's just on offense. Forget the other end of the court because those guys were miles ahead of him. But Sir Charles did say it was about offense.
Jordan never attempted more than 100 threes in a season until his 6th year in the NBA.
Right. Yeah, no.
It just is a different game. The 3-point thing, Charles Barkley knows more about basketball than you and I will ever. He's forgotten more about basketball than you and I ever.
He doesn't watch much of it, but I do love Charles.
But that point just doesn't make any sense to me because again, it's a completely different game. It'd be like in football trying to judge running backs now versus running backs who carried the ball 40 times a game, in the 1920s. It's not the same thing.
Or how do you compare quarterbacks from even the 80s to quarterbacks now when, wide receivers were held down the field so they couldn't get open as easily as they do now, and quarterbacks would regularly get hit 2-3 seconds after they got rid of the ball. Now, if you do that, the defensive player gets suspended. So it's a different era that we're playing in.
It's totally different.
Yep.
So that's what Charles Barkley had to say. Draymond Green, we'll get to the next bombastic person now. Draymond Green, he's never one to not boast about himself, which, he's won championships and he has the right to do that. And that's why he's a really fun personality. He said that he is the best defensive player in the history of the NBA, a comment that I personally find laughable. Sap, I was surprised to hear that you don't.
I don't find it laughable, and here's the reason. When we think of great defensive players, we normally think of rim protectors. So obviously the first name that comes to mind as an old person is Bill Russell, right? I mean, Bill Russell's biggest asset, besides being the smartest player of his era, the best leader in sports, the most clutch player of his era, was the best defensive player of his era. So he's the first name that comes to mind. And then other centers that were intimidating defensive forces. Wilt Chamberlain, Kareem was a really good defensive player, as was Olajuwon. So you think of the big guys first. Well, that's not necessarily needed now because rim protector is something it's nice to have, but it's not necessary. I mean, Rudy Gobert won Defensive Player of the Year. He's considered a good rim protector. And the last time he faced Joel Embiid nearly stuffed him in the basket.
Lit him up.
And scored 40 points on him. So I don't buy into that. You normally don't think of small guys as great defenders. I would say among the smaller guys, the best I've seen recently would be Chris Paul. Great defensive player, great feet, great hands, incredible mind. So I would say he's the best of the smaller defenders.
Marcus Smart.
Smart. Your guy, yeah, exactly. He's a little bigger than Chris Paul. He's more 6'3", 6'4" than 5'11", 6 feet. It's the mid-sized guys that always intrigue me. So I'm talking about the likes of Dennis Rodman, who was a great defensive player. Michael Jordan was a great defensive player. Kobe was a near great defensive player. LeBron can be a great defensive player when he's engaged, which is what he is in big moments. Again, he's got more responsibility than any other player that's ever played. So sometimes he saves a little bit on the defensive end, but when necessary, he's a great defensive player. I think Bruce Bowen is someone I'll throw out there. Gary Payton right there as a point guard like Chris Paul. I mean, could you picture a backcourt of Chris Paul and Gary Payton together? That would be a nightmare for Gary the other
Payton,
team.
Bigger than Chris Paul. I think Gary Payton was like 6'4". Right?
6'4". And Gary Payton, remember in The Last Dance, talked about how he frustrated Michael Jordan in the 1996 finals.
Yeah, Jordan did not agree with that sentiment.
If you look at the numbers, he covered Jordan in games 4, 5, and 6. Jordan averaged 17
did not like
games.
that.
Well, Jordan doesn't like anybody pushing back against him. In games 4, 5, and 6, Jordan averaged 17 a game and shot about 33% from the floor. Peyton did a really good job. You're not stopping Michael Jordan. If they had played another game, Jordan would have figured it out and probably went for 40. Draymond Green is maybe the most versatile defensive player we've ever seen. Can I make that case? I mean, he's a rim protector at 6'6".
No.
He can cover stretch fours, which is vital in today's NBA. He can switch off of pick and rolls. I think he's one of the most versatile defenders we've ever seen. And I think playing defense now is more difficult than it's ever been. The hand check has been outlawed pretty much in the NBA. But the players today have to cover a wider variance of players, and they have to cover more of the court, right? So let's say Golden State's playing Brooklyn, and he's covering Kevin Durant. how the hell do you cover Kevin Durant? Because he can shoot from 40 feet. He can put it on the floor. He can post up. I think the offensive game is at the highest it's ever been. So defense is tougher to play now than it's ever been. I'm not saying that Draymond Green is the greatest defensive player ever. I think he's one of the most versatile defensive players ever. So I don't think his comments are that outlandish. I mean, I love Draymond, and I think Draymond is going to be great when he retires on TV or whatever he wants to do, making Subway commercials with Jason Tatum, which I find hilarious because you could not find two more different people than Jason Tatum and Draymond Green. I mean, if you put Draymond Green's heart and desire into Jason Tatum's body, you'd have an all-time great player. But I'm going to say that Draymond, if he could have just used a few more words and said versatile, maybe one word, most versatile defender ever, I would buy into that because he can cover a wide variance of guys.
I don't even think he's the best defensive player of his era. I think that's Kawhi Leonard in my mind. There's a lot of talk about this when he first said it earlier in the week, and people were putting out their lists of, who are the best defensive players ever. The best defensive player I've ever seen over a lengthy period of time was Scottie Pippen, and he was absent from a lot of these lists.
I forgot.
I was shocked. I thought he was the best and Jordan is an all-time great defender. Rodman's an all-time great defender. I thought Scottie Pippen was the best defensive player in the Bulls.
You're right. I'm surprised. And again, Pippen sometimes falls through the cracks because he played with Jordan. And I always had Pippen as a top 30 player. And anytime I put my list out, and I'll change it a little bit. People go, "What's Pippen doing on there?" I go, "Well, he won 6 titles. We do, count these titles are very important." He was the best defensive player of his era. That's how good they were defensively, though. When they had Pippen, Jordan, Rodman, Kukoc was long. He wasn't a great defender, but he was long. I mean, they could just shut down teams. They held the Jazz in one finals game to like 57 points. Well, they had Karl Malone.
Insane.
I understand why they
Pippen,
sucked.
Talk about versatile. I mean, he could do everything.
Right, he could cover everybody. He in the 91 finals, so you're too young to remember this because you were probably 2 at the time. And I was
2, yep.
I was a huge Magic fan. So it was finally Magic, Jordan in the NBA
Orlando
finals,
Magic
right?
fan, yep.
Yes, no, not Orlando Magic fan, Magic Johnson. And the first game of the finals, Jordan was on Magic, and the Lakers won that game, and Magic had a triple-double. After that game, Pippen checked Magic, shut him down, and the Bulls won in 5 games. So to your point, Pippen was probably the better defender than Jordan. Again, he didn't have as much responsibility as Jordan, so that's part of it. Like on any given possession, Jordan could clamp down and shut pretty much anyone down. But Pippen's definitely in that discussion. I think Draymond has some similar qualities to Pippen. It's tougher to play defense now than it was back then. You're covering more. So,
I'd say,
you got all different types of players.
Listen, I'm obviously, I was born in '89, so I grew up on '90s basketball. So 2 of my favorite all-time defensive players that I love watching were, as I mentioned, Gary Payton and Scottie Pippen. In terms of guys that I've seen, though, if you were like, I need a stop here, we need a stop on this possession, the best guy I've seen at that is Kevin Garnett. Was just, because he was a psycho. So He would put everything into one defensive possession. And talk about a versatile defensive player, because he was 7 feet tall and he was guarding guards.
He's in that discussion too. There's a bunch of guys. I think you have to separate though, right? You have to separate the bigs. Although Garnett is a big at 7 foot tall, he could cover smaller players. Like you almost have to take Russell, Chamberlain, all of those guys out of the equation. They're bigs. They're
I think if you don't take bigs out of it, I think it's Russell. Obvious. I think by a mile, a country mile.
It led to 11 championships. I mean, there's no disputing that, and that was probably his most famous skill, among one of his best skills. So yeah, but as far as guys that can cover a wide variety of players, Pippen's in there, Draymond Green's in there. I don't think Garnett's going to, in his prime, even check point guards. I mean, that's asking a little bit too much. Whereas I think Draymond can cover a center or he can cover a point guard, because the game is different though than it was when Garnett was playing.
Yeah, I mean, it's also nice that, the Warriors are up by 50 on a lot of these teams. So, he didn't have to play as intense defense. It's not like he shut down LeBron James when they played in the finals, as you like to point out, Sap.
No one shuts down LeBron James. I mean,
they didn't even have him defending LeBron James. They had Iguodala defending LeBron James.
Well, Iguodala did, yeah. And Iguodala got schooled by LeBron. It's just that, in comparison to the first 3 games when LeBron was averaging 39, he only averaged like 29 the last 3 games. But don't forget with Draymond, Game 7 of the 2016 finals, when the Cavaliers finished that series off by winning games 5, 6, and 7, Draymond got suspended for Game 5, but in Game 7 he had a near triple-double. I think he had 9 rebounds, 12 assists, and I think he hit for 31 points. He was the best player on Golden State in that 7th game because Steph sucked in Game 7 of that finals. Draymond kept them in it, and ultimately the Cavaliers were able to win that game and series. But I think it's so easy to say this guy is crazy because we kind of think of Draymond as being a little crazy. But if he just threw in the word versatile, then I think people would have bought a little more. But I do like your choice of Scottie Pippen. I think Scottie Pippen is a guy that you forget about because he played with Jordan. Isn't it almost a case of when, and look, Jordan's better than Pippen, and I think in baseball, A-Rod's better than Derek Jeter, but Jeter was the shortstop. A-Rod was the third baseman for the Yankees, but for 10 years, the best shortstop on the Yankees was Alex Rodriguez. They just didn't play him there because they wouldn't dare take Jeter out of shortstop. Right. So it's almost like Jordan's our greatest defender. We don't want to offend him, even though Pippen's better, because Pippen didn't have the same personality like Jordan, because Pippen was always the guy that was, getting yelled at by the coaches, getting yelled at by Jordan, grew up in extreme poverty and was just, kind of a self-made player.
Yeah, went to Central Arkansas. Jordan went to North Carolina.
Yeah, I mean, Jordan came from a middle-class background. Pippen, remember the stories in The Last Dance about Pippen? He had like 2 relatives in wheelchairs with cerebral palsy. They had dirt floors.
Yeah, he had a tough life.
I mean,
he didn't make it. He made some of the things easy for, to punch down on Pippen because, he quit on the team at one point.
Yeah, he did.
So, but that was his own fault. But yeah, I mean.
Although Jordan retired in 93 after winning his 3rd straight title, the Bulls went 57-25 in 92-93, won the title. The next year without Jordan, they still won 55 games. I don't think you'd ever see that happen to a LeBron team. If LeBron left the team, they usually go from 57 wins to like 27 wins. That's one of the big reasons.
Maybe if he had a teammate as good as Scottie Pippen, maybe they would be okay. I mean, he left Cleveland, he left the cupboard pretty thin.
As your former mentor, maybe still is your mentor, Glenn Ordway would say, you're proving my point. He didn't get to play with players like that. And when he played with Wade and Bosh in Miami, what did Miami do after he left?
Oh, they got old.
Mic drop.
They got old. Let's get to our third bombastic guy from the NBA today, Sap. Phil Jackson, who has been living on a ranch in Montana for the last. It's not like we've heard from him a lot recently.
Branch Davidian, but who knows where he is?
He decided to do a podcast with his former player, Kobe Carl, son of former NBA head coach George Karl, who we could do another podcast on because there's a lot of players who have a lot of not so nice things to say about George Karl. They were talking about his tenure with the New York Knicks, which I think you can agree, Sep, was an abject disaster, just a straight up failure.
Yeah, because he didn't have Jordan, Pippen, Kobe, or Shaq. It's kind of funny how that works.
And Phil Jackson's not happy about the perception. As he went as far as to say, I understand what Donald Trump had to live with probably for his first 3.5 years in office with media and just the very short term of being in that seat with the Knicks. He had some other quotes here about, you remember he had that thing about spots on the leopard with Carmelo Anthony that some people said was racist. He pushed that back. But I think the money quote is I understand what Trump had to live with and that the media was not fair to him during his tenure in New York. Is there any merit to him blaming the media for what went wrong with the Knicks when he was running that team?
No, because was like Frank Isola making the picks for the Knicks or anybody else that was covering the team or any columnist? Was Peter Vesey? Not even sure if Peter was still working in the media at that point. Were they making picks?
First 3 seasons in New York, 17-65, 32-50, 31-51.
Yeah, and outside of Porzingis, what were drafts? The drafts were not very good, right? I mean, Porzingis was good, and then they moved on from Porzingis because of contract, stalemate.
Well,
and also the fact
they
that
didn't like
he's
him.
Injury prone. They didn't like him. Yeah,
they had an issue. Yeah. So this is, Phil Jackson's obviously an arrogant guy. I mean, that comes with the territory of winning that many titles. But this is ridiculous. That I think he's just somebody that. He's not knowing how to deal with failure, and this was a huge, huge failure and blemish on his, which was to this point, pretty spotless resume. And this was his last stop in the NBA, and it was a disaster. I keep using that word, but it was. And because the Knicks have been a joke. But I understand what Trump had to live with so he's going to take the Donald Trump route and blame the media for everything that's gone wrong and say fake news,
fake news, Jet.
What's he talking about? The media has nothing to do with how well the team played. He's making decisions. He built the roster. He was given the keys to the car, and the team, they sucked.
Didn't he give Derek Fisher like a huge contract to coach the team, and Fisher lasted 1 year with no coaching experience? So
and I don't believe his coach since.
No, not at all. So it's like he made the moves. He had carte blanche there. I would think. Weren't they paying him $10 million a year to run basketball operations? And this is 7-8 years ago. It's not now.
I think it was more than that. It was an insane amount of money.
It was insane. It was maybe $15 million or $20. It was like this incredible amount of money. And he wasn't even working in New York. Wasn't he working from the ranch or the cabin or wherever the hell he is in Montana, Wyoming? You can do that now. I mean, especially with the pandemic.
There were pictures of him sleeping at Knicks games all the time. He fell asleep.
Who wasn't sleeping at Knicks games? At least the Knicks now are watchable, right? They're a 500 team, and you got Thibodeau's doing a great job and Julius Randle. So at least they're entertaining to watch. That team was horrible. No, he's insane. Here's Phil Jackson.
Here's what he went on to say. He said, you had a media that was decidedly against the organization, and they were looking for whatever they could do to throw aspirations on the organization. I think James Dolan felt like I was facing too big of an uphill climb, and he relieved me of the job because he saw the media was just going to be backing Carmelo in this situation, and I was going to be the guy that was taking the lumps. I mean, there was a lot of distortion that went into it, and texting and media was a big part of it.
Texting?
I don't know what I'm reading it verbatim. I don't know what the hell he meant by that.
like texting back and forth? Was it like a new thing that he just found out about, that texting was being done in 2000? And when was he there? 2014, 15, whatever the years were. It wasn't there a long time, because even Dolan, as big as a boob as he is, kind of said, well, we've got to move on from this guy. But Phil Jackson, it almost sounds a little bit like Belichick last year was blaming the salary cap, that he sucked last year because of the salary cap, because they always
spent
to the cap, which is not true. Why. Yeah, it's the only reason. Not your bad drafts, or not your decision to say, you know what, I got the greatest quarterback in the history of the sport. Let's move on from him. We'll go.
Well, this offseason, he's come as close to as he can as admitting a mistake. He's not going to say it
without
in public,
admitting
but
it.
Phil Jackson still has not. I mean, this is not admitting a mistake. Here, the article that I'm reading on NBC Sports points out, they said the media did write plenty of unflattering stories about Jackson, but Jackson was notably unreachable during a trade deadline, fell asleep during a draft prospects workout, couldn't get his computer to work during a free agent pitch, and was always unprepared in his meetings. Those are facts. Yeah, those are stories that are sourced.
He sounds like Donald Trump then, right? Not prepared, computer wasn't working. Trump always had his phone working so he could tweet out. Yeah, I mean, the game passed him by, obviously. And you know what? You didn't have Jordan, Pippen, Kobe, or Shaq. That's the big difference, and that's why he won 11 titles with those 4 all-time great players. He could have done whatever he wanted to do. Trade up in the draft, trade down in the draft, approach free agents. He did none of it. He mailed it in for whatever amount of money he was making. He rested on his laurels, and he was a disaster, and he should just go away. It's not the media's fault. Do you think the media wants the team they're covering to suck? Is that really any benefit to anyone? I mean,
here in Boston they do. Yeah.
Right. Well, look at this. Look at the Patriots, right? The Patriots have been awesome for 20 years. People that have covered that team, whether it be from, Tommy Curran to pick anyone else, they've built a nice cottage industry for themselves, right? Writing books with players.
I'll rephrase. They want the team to be good and fall short of expectations. That is the dream for a lot of the people in the media. They want them to get to the championship game and lose.
You really believe that? See, I think they just root for the story, which is what we all do, right? We all root for the story. But, I mean, okay, I'm going to use 2 examples of probably the 2 biggest media members in the city of Boston, because talk radio in Boston, trumps, no pun intended, but it trumps, newspapers at this point, TVs, stations as well. I mean, Shaughnessy still catches has a lot of cachet as a columnist. The two biggest names in the city are Felger and Maz, right? Well, Felger covered the Patriots in the early 2000s when they were winning Super Bowls, and Maz covered the Red Sox when they were winning World Series, and they were able to take that and get on radio, build their brand, and then move over to the Sports Hub, and now they have one of the most successful shows in the country. So I think it benefited them that those teams were that good. If the Patriots had sucked all those years, or the Red Sox had sucked all those years, do we know if those guys would have been?
No, you're right. It's when the team is irrelevant. It's not
That's
good
the worst
for anybody.
Yeah. Do you actually think you think the Celtics scribes actually aren't rooting for the Celtics to win a championship? It seems like they take
the Celtics
more
the
seriously.
Celtics. I'm saying
they're like
Felger and Maz. The talk radio people are rooting for teams to fall short of high expectations.
Yeah. No, because that's the story, right? I mean, what Super Bowl do we talk about the most still is the Patriots losing to the Eagles, right? Without Malcolm Butler, or the Patriots losing twice.
People still call
to
about
the Giants.
That.
We're not waxing poetic about the Patriots win over Carolina in Super Bowl 38, which, by the way, probably
people talk way more about the Giants ones than any Super Bowl the Patriots have won.
And that Carolina game of the 9 Super Bowls they played in was probably, I'd say, that and the Seattle win were the two best pure football games of the run, and they won both of them. But we talk more about the losses.
Sap, let me just end then with this story about the meeting, the failed free agency meeting. This is from Frank Isola, who, again, did not make the draft picks for the Knicks.
My man, I love Frank.
This story is from one of the last years of Phil Jackson's tenure in 2017. When Phil Jackson sat down with a free agent last July, the meeting got off to an awkward start when Jackson could not get his computer to work. General manager Steve Mills had to step in and start the video of how Jackson envisioned the Knicks and the unnamed free agent would play. The video? Footage of the 1990 Chicago Bulls. The free agent in question was confused. He couldn't figure out if Jeff Hornacek or Jackson was the coach. Either way, the player signed elsewhere.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's perfect. I mean, if you're making that much money, you just make sure you got someone with you. If I made $12 to $15 million a year, if I made like $1 million a year, I'd probably have a techie by my side. Or if you're not very good with that type of stuff, have someone that's going to help you through that. I don't think Belichick is great at this. I'm sure Stacey James with the Patriots or someone else is in charge of making sure that, Bill's able to do his conference calls, meet with the media, whatever the case may be. Phil Jackson is just such an unlikable boob who just, was lucky to coach 4 all-time great players.
Ultimately, his team's running the Knicks, even though it was the media's fault. They went 80-166 for his hard work. He was paid a total of $60 million for that record.
Yeah, so he was making $12 million a year. I remember it was a 5-year, $60 million contract.
Not bad.
No, so it was essentially, almost $1 million a win. That's if you can get that,
good.
God bless you. Yeah, no, he
was the highest paid executive in American sports.
I thought you were going to just say in America at that time. I mean, Bezos was making more with Amazon, I'm sure. But yeah, no,
he was making $2 million more a year than Theo Epstein at the time.
Yeah, and Theo's my guy. I love Theo. I want Theo to run for president someday.
Well, maybe he will. Maybe he'll be the first Jewish president.
I would vote for him.
We got no more bombastic, stupid quotes today, Sap. So that's going to do it for our show. Because unless you can find somebody else who says something dumb, well, you do a good job, but you're no Phil Jackson.
No, I'm not making $12 million a year. I'm not Charles Barkley. I'm not quite as big as Charles, and I never played defense as good as Draymond Green. But I like Charles a lot, and I love Draymond. I like when they're together because they've got some real tension there between them. You could see that. But Draymond, what I like about Draymond, he's anything but passive aggressive. He'll go after Barkley. Remember when Durant was on with Barkley and was like silent, which is typical Kevin Durant, passive aggressive.
Yeah, that was weird and also not that unexpected. Yeah, Durant's a weird guy. He's still. The other day I saw he was arguing on Twitter again with some random person. He can't help himself. He literally cannot help himself.
Nope.
But we're not here to help him. We're here to make fun of these people when they do stuff like that. So that will do it for the Pick and Roll NBA podcast with Jet and Sap, presented by Full Press Coverage. Again, check out their website, fullpresscoverage.com. You can find our podcast there. We're up on YouTube now. We're working out the kinks, but we're still going to put it up. We don't have any flashy visuals, but you can see our faces, and that's a good start. And Sap, any columns coming out that people should know about?
No, I was going to write a column off this poll that we talked about the last podcast with, who would you take, the Celtics duo or the New Orleans duo? So I'm going to stay away from that. I've been writing mostly about basketball because, we're doing the podcast and we're right in basketball season. It's basketball season. Plus there's like a million different people writing about football. Am I going to weigh in now on when's Garoppolo going to join the Patriots and when is Aaron Rodgers leaving Green Bay, which I think is in a year. But I retweeted a column I wrote in April where I think Rodgers is going to play one more year in Green Bay and then move on and end up with the Patriots. So if it's Garoppolo and Newton and it doesn't work out this year, then maybe my guy is going to be throwing footballs for Bill Belichick and the Patriots. And I've already got LeBron coming here. You get Rodgers
coming to Boston. You get LeBron coming here. What the hell? Mike Trout, is he going to
I don't
Red
really
Sox
have
soon?
Trout and Mookie are my two favorite players. But although Fernando Tatis
Sidney Crosby
Jr.,
coming by?
Mario Lemieux. But Mario's in retirement. My favorite current player. He's done. Mario's, he can probably still come out and score a couple of goals. My favorite current player is probably Alexander Ovechkin. I just love him. Maybe Roger Federer. Is there going to be a tournament in the Boston area that I can go
Boston
attend and say hi to my
Lobsters. He could play for the Lobsters. Robert Kraft owned that team, right?
He did. That was the first franchise that Robert Kraft owned. Yeah.
Was that a all women's tennis or is it doubles tennis? What the hell was it?
No, it was world team tennis. So it was it was men's and women's. They had Martina Navratilova one summer, just after she had won her first Wimbledon. Yeah. I used to love. I love tennis. So it would be, I believe you'd have women's single, women's double, men's single, men's double, and maybe mixed. So you'd have 5 different matches. Very entertaining. I think they played at Boston University. And
Go Lobsters.
Before the Agganis Center was built. Yeah, the Lobsters, which is actually a pretty cool nickname, right, for a Boston team. And
we got the Maine Red Claws, the G League team of the Celtics, which has housed many of their great players.
Yeah, they've got the best roster in the G League, right? I mean, they got all these guys that were drafted in the first round playing up there.
They constantly
likes to hoard players.
Yep.
Yeah,
they constantly stack it. But
I'm sure I'll be working on something. We'll see what happens this weekend and react to the buyout market and also all these trades that took place a couple days ago.
All right, sounds great, Sap. You can find him on Twitter at JohnSap25. You can find me on Twitter at JetStryer. Keep an eye out on our Twitter. We always tweet out the show and any other things we're doing. Again, we are the Pick and Roll NBA podcast with Jet and Sap, presented by Full Press Coverage.